Welcome to PCM's Webinar Thursday. We are thrilled to have you with us today for our webinar, Microsoft Surface and Microsoft 365 Enterprise Mobility plus Security Solutions. Joining us today is Mike Nichols and John Pontius. We're going to get right into our presentation in just a few minutes, but first I have a few housekeeping items. Please enter your questions in the question box on the right-hand side, and I'll relay those to our speaker at the end of the presentation. We do send out a survey at the end of the webinar. Please fill it out and let us know how we did, as well as topics you'd like to see covered on future webinars. You should see that survey in your inbox later today. Speaking of future webinars, please be sure to check out our weekly webinar schedule on our website at www.pcm.com/webinars/archives. We are recording this webinar. It will be available for playback in a few days. Recordings are posted to our webinars page along with our upcoming webinar schedule. There you can also find previous webinar recordings. And with that, we're going to get started with our presentation today, and I'm happy to hand it off to Mike.
Thank you, George. Appreciate it. And welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm joined by my colleague, John Pontius, and we're going to discuss Surface, enabling the modern workforce when it's combined with Microsoft 365 and enterprise mobility and security. So we'll talk a little bit about how the workplace has shifted and sort of the changes that are taking place there, and what's really driving the innovation and the technology from Microsoft to adapt to that changing work environment. So with that, let's just dive in to it. And first slide here, it's productivity is a priority, right? Absolutely. Everybody needs to be productive. If you're, no matter where you are, right? And then when we talk about the workplace shifting, right, that's really a shift in just how employees expect to be able to work and collaborate and get things done and be creative, right? They demand more flexibility than ever these days, right? Like they need to be able to work from wherever. Maybe they're traveling, right? Maybe they're on the road quite a bit, but they still need to connect with their teams. They still need to connect with their customers. They still need to, access, their information, right? So, it definitely is a top priority for any business out there right now is making sure that their employees are productive wherever they are working, right? But along with that, right, comes some challenges for IT, right? And sort of how do you enable that mobile workforce, right? In collaboration, cloud, mobility, and security, those are all priorities for IT to really land that experience for their workforces. But at the same time, keeping all of that necessary data and tools and company information that's very sensitive, right? And keeping that protected, and how do you do that in a mobile environment? John, you can go to the next one. It's all about the people, right? Like I mentioned, people, they're crucial to driving the business, right? Like that's any company's currency, right? There is their people, right? And how do we give, those employees the best experience possible? It's going to be a combination of, being mobile, right? Being able, like I said, to connect to business critical systems and information, and then interacting, with their colleagues in a team environment, right? Being creative is one of the most important things right now out there. How do you get teams to bounce ideas off of each other and things like that, in an easy and simplified way? So we think Microsoft Surface and Microsoft 365 absolutely, get that done, and we see Microsoft transforming the way people work every day. For instance, today, I'm flying around. I've flew into Chicago today to do a training with our company, but I also had this webinar, right? So, during the flight, even though it's very short from Detroit to Chicago, I think it's about 45 minutes, but I had time to, take my Surface device out, jump on a few presentations that I had to work on. I got work done, right? I was productive, while I was doing that. And, if anybody's flown lately, the spaces are tight, in those seats. So having that device that I could just break out and put the kickstand out, it barely fit on the shelf in front of me, but it did, and I was able to get some work done, right? And that's what we talk about, right? Like when we say transforming the way we work, and the next slide I really like too, John, if you can move to that, is really the journey that that Microsoft has been on, from the Surface Pro when it initially launched in February 2013, which is when I started on managing the product, all the way through today, where now we have multiple form factors. We have the Surface Pro, which really is the ultimate two-in-one device, the ultimate mobile device, in my opinion, to get work done wherever you are. But then you also have devices like the Surface Book, Surface Book 2, that have tons of graphics power in there that can really replace a desktop, but at the same time, be able to detach that screen and use that as a fully functioning tablet if you need to go, maybe take some pictures and write up a document or meet with some people, and then go back to your desk and dock that in and then engage the GPU again to work on those really graphic-intensive applications that you might need to use. And then all the way to Surface Studio, all in one, right? So large, beautiful screen, great for creatives going on there, drawing on the screen, moving things, working in a way maybe that they haven't been able to in the past, angling that down into studio mode so they can really get in and get creative and, do their best work. And then Surface Hub, right, is, a new collaborative device that's out there that's really changing the way meetings are being held and the way people are interacting with each other. So Microsoft's vision really on their products, is trying to match what the people want, right? Like, what do our employees need to be productive, to get their jobs done? That's why Microsoft started creating hardware, because they wanted to innovate and create new spaces, new product categories that met some of the needs that they were seeing that weren't met by the current products in market. So, with that, I'm just going to go into a few, specific areas, right, where, Surface really shines, when we talk about, creativity, collaboration, and security. So if you want to go to the next one, John, we'll discuss, the creative part of this real quick. And I don't know if you have to build it out or not, but yeah, there you go. But, unlocking creativity, right? So one of the nice things about Surface and all the Surface devices is the different types of input that you can use on the device, right? They're all touch, but they all have the best inking experience available out there, right? Especially for creatives, but not even just for creatives, having a pen there so you can just literally take notes on the fly with OneNote, just work naturally with touch and pen and keyboard. It really adjusts to the way that user wants to work, right? It matches what works best for them, no matter which one it is. Perfect balance of power and mobility, right? So if you look at the Surface Pro, you can get that all the way up to an i7, 16 gig of RAM, 1 terabyte drive, all that in a compact device that is super portable that you can throw in your backpack and just head out the door, right? And take with you the whole day, right? And have battery life that works the whole day, that lasts with you. Displays that are beautiful, right? Like that you look at, you see, all the detail, all the colors, in especially marketing, and teams like that are designing, maybe it's flyers or things like that. And like I said, the most versatile form factors, right? You have, the 2-in-1 for the Pro. There's Surface Laptop, which is more of the traditional clamshell device. The Surface Book 2, which is still a 2-in-1 device, but more powerful, more of a desktop replacement. And Surface Studio, the all-in-one larger screen. So there really is, a form factor that fits every scenario, right? For almost any type of worker in the organization. 91% it says it helps them express their creative ideas more effectively. Also, like 93% say that Surface makes them feel like their company is investing in them. And that's a big takeaway too, right? Like the workforce that's coming in right now, they are demanding new technology, the latest and greatest. They want that to work on, right? So when you invest in Surface and you invest in your employees, that's retaining talent right there. You know what I mean? And if anybody knows about HR, turnover can be pretty expensive, right? You get somebody, trained, put all that money into them, do all that, and then to lose them, it's like, that's pretty pretty costly in itself right there. So, something like having a device, like a Surface device, makes that experience even better and makes them more productive and makes them a better employee, then, that's a great value, I would say. So, the next slide that we're going to go to is simplicity, really. And John's going to go into some of this in a little bit, later, but Windows Autopilot. So a new way to deploy devices, Windows 10 devices, and Surface was at the forefront of this technology. So, being able to ship a device to an end user, have that end user pick up that PC, log in with their credentials, and have all the policies, all the applications that they need loaded, and having that device ready to go in a matter of minutes. That's what Autopilot does. And John will go into a little bit more in terms of what's required and some of the features that are required to get that done. But that's changing the way we're seeing deployments for Windows 10 devices, not only Surface but the other devices too, like Lenovo, HP. The OEMs are also going to be leveraging this technology. Enterprise manageability, right? This is a device that has full enterprise capabilities out of the box. All it requires really is the right key to open that up, so it knows that it's able to access those features. And you have the full breadth of Windows 10 enterprise features, from security, productivity, you name it, right? It's there. Single standard universal dock that works with all the different devices. So whether you have a Surface Pro, Surface Laptop, Surface Book, or a combination of those, one dock works with all of them, right? It's the same connect port that's going to go into all of them. Same for the pen and the Surface Dial. It's going to work universally across all the devices. Flexible purchasing and comprehensive care. So, these are also available as a subscription, right? So PCM does offer Surface as a subscription to our customers. So moving from that CapEx to an OpEx model, looking at it more of a per user cost, especially when you might already be looking at Office 365, in that type of model. Why not look at the hardware the same way, right? Hardware, comes out very quickly, right? Most companies are having a 12 to 18 month refresh cycle on technology. So, being able to stay relevant, stay current, if that's a priority, moving to a subscription type, purchasing model might make sense, right? So you can always have the latest and greatest. And if you have Windows 10 in your environment, you're going to be ready for that next iteration as you get the updates and you stay current with that OS. So, some great things there just in terms of the simplicity. And finally, I just want to sort of go over some of the security, features that come with Surface. Again, right, Windows 10 Enterprise, all the security features available through Windows 10 Enterprise, like Device Guard. Sorry, going blank, but there's a lot of them that are built in to Windows 10 Enterprise. Again, like I said, always updated, right? So Windows 10 is software as a service, right? So, these devices are going to be constantly updated and maintained, which is super important from a security aspect, right? Like, we don't want to miss a patch or a security update, right, that gets ignored or gets lost, and then you end up being the next company on the front page that had a massive data breach, right, and all of your customers' information was stolen or lost because the security patch wasn't in place, right? So with Windows 10, you don't have to necessarily worry about that as much, right? You still have some flexibility and control on how you let those updates deploy into the organization, but it is going to be a regularly, in place thing, that's going to be constant. firmware level security with Surface Enterprise mobility. So from a firmware level, you can turn things off like the camera. You can turn Bluetooth off. There are a lot of different features from the firmware level that you can deactivate or activate depending on the needs of that user or the sensitivity of that user, where he's going to be, who that person's going to be around, all those things. Works securely anywhere with an eSIM. So Microsoft recently launched the Surface Pro with LTE devices in December. So we've been seeing a lot of activity, a lot of interest in that device. And the great thing about having LTE built into that device is you don't have to rely on a public Wi-Fi network where there's tons of phishing, there's lots of risk there, right? You have a secure connection that's there, it's ready to go. You can access, again, your content anywhere you are, if it's web-based, as long as you have, LTE service where you are. Biometric identification. So with all the Surface devices right now, you can use Windows Hello. So whether that's facial recognition to, get into the device versus using a password or even a fingerprint, those are all available on all of the Surface devices. So that's just another added security, measure in the device, right, from the hardware level and software level. And down there you can see that the NSA, right, has deployed a ton of Windows 10 and Surface devices. If they feel safe, I think we should all feel safe. So with that, the next slide. I like the next slide, right, because it sort of just works you through a day, right, of somebody that's using one of these devices, right? So, maybe you wake up in the morning, right, in this case, right, it's an employee in a law firm, he's waking up, taking interviews, taking some hand notes, with the Surface Book on his screen. After that, he's joining a video conference on Skype for Business, with his team to discuss, what took place. You got face-to-face meeting there, with awesome camera, awesome display. Again, collaboration, feeling like your teammates right there, be able to talk to them is great. And then later on, just working on some documents while he's in a taxi going somewhere else, right? Just pulling that out and again, being able to get work done, being productive. And then later on, sharing those documents securely, right? Leveraging OneDrive. And then finally, getting back home or getting back to the desk, firing it up and just reviewing everything that transpired that day and reviewing the team's feedback, right? So that's just sort of a day in the life of Surface, if you will. So John, if you can go to the next one. I think this might be my last point, but before I turn it over to you, John. But again, Microsoft Surface is a device designed for the modern workplace, right? It's built for Microsoft 365. The engineering teams for both Microsoft 365 and Surface work hand in hand developing this product, so it works perfectly on these devices. It is innovative hardware, right? They're always trying to figure out what users want and meet that need. And it is loved by employees, people that have these things. I am one of them. I love it. I don't know how I would work with anything else, pretty much. But IT also loves it because they can manage it with the modern tools that John's about to go into. And with that, John, I might hand it over to you. I think that was my last slide, I think.
Yeah, thanks very much, guys. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Microsoft 365 and the Microsoft 365 powered device and how Microsoft 365 and some of the products that Microsoft is building into its enterprise mobility and security suite are really changing the ways that we're approaching modern mobility and device management in the enterprise. So like Mike was just saying, Microsoft 365 has a lot of features. It's built to unlock creativity. It's built for teamwork and collaboration. It's integrated across a number of products and services from Microsoft all the way to the OEMs for simplicity. And it's built around this concept of intelligent security. How are we securing the device how are we securing data? And really I want to focus on, how that intelligent security story is bound up with where we have been in the past and where we are going with the future of the workplace in Microsoft 365. So if anybody's familiar with Microsoft licensing, anyone on the phone has worked with Microsoft in the past, you know that the past model for licensing an endpoint, for licensing a desktop, was a number of different point products. They all had their different licensing models. You had to have Cal suites included with them. You had your applications. Then you had your Office applications. You had your backend infrastructure. You had your operating system. You had client access rights for the same. With Microsoft 365, we're evolving that model to a true per user subscription model so that you don't have to worry about all the complexities of licensing individual devices, Cal suites anymore. Now we have one bundle of products with Microsoft 365 that includes your Office products, the Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite that we're going to touch on here, your client operating system, and we're really talking about how are we moving our modern workplace into a more cloud-friendly model, into a more cloud-managed model, into what Satya and Microsoft always call that, cloud-first, mobile-first world. So Microsoft 365 is helping to evolve from the past solutions that Microsoft had in place that many of us as IT professionals are still out there using, and into a model that is more aligned with the modern workplace and all the things that Mike kind of just spoke about that are driving device adoption. So I'm going to spend the rest of this time really talking about that intelligent security story and how, especially when we talk about the Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite from Microsoft, how that's aligning new models for identity control, for device control, for information control, and data protection. Again, this is really touching on how inside that intelligent security story, not only are we evolving models from the Microsoft platform, but we're just evolving models of IT. A traditional IT platform, not just from a Microsoft licensing side, but from a standard, how do we approach our end users and our endpoints, was a single device that we owned with applications that we controlled that was deployed manually. We brought it into our warehouse and our deployment facility to image. And it was extremely reactive and high touch when there were new deployments to be considered or problems to be reckoned with. And in the modern IT, we have multiple devices that users are using to access business and corporate data that may be business owned but may also be user owned. We've got applications that are not only legacy applications inside our network, but are also third-party SaaS applications across a number of other third-party clouds. We have an automated deployment process. So we're looking at how can we more effectively deploy and reach these endpoints without a high-touch, not stressed, but how we're taking a lot of time to get there, and how can we automate that? We're talking about a proactive method of management. We're talking about being able to release these services to employees on a self-service basis. How can we empower our employees to do things themselves as opposed to always having to come to us as IT professionals to make sure that their device or their endpoint's getting the proper applications, that they're resetting their passwords, etc. So what is the Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite? That linchpin when we talk about the components of Microsoft 365 that's enabling this kind of cloud-first, mobile-first world. The Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite is a comprehensive set of tools to address, this is the only slide I'll read completely, guys, I apologize, to address the growing issue of how organizations meet their management needs in a mobile-first, cloud-first world. Provides the ability for organizations to manage their environment with a consistent identity, manage devices, file-level policy protection. So what we're talking about here is how are we as IT professionals approaching our environment in a world where so much of the productivity of our users, so much of our corporate data lives outside what we might consider the traditional IT boundaries, things like the domain and the firewall. How are we making sure that our data, which is the most important piece of our intellectual property, the most important piece of our organization, how are we making sure that that is protected when we have users accessing data on their phones, when we have data that's in third-party clouds, when so much of the actual productive work is being done on Surface devices with LTE or at home on BYOD machines. So what can we do to protect ourselves and our data in that new world that looks very different from a lockdown, narrow environment that we are used to working in? So there's a couple of pieces that we build, a couple of pillars that we're building this new world around, that we're looking at the landscape of that cloud-first, mobile-first world, and we're saying, okay, well, what really matters when we talk about security, when we talk about mobility, when we talk about empowering our users? So Microsoft Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite includes identity and access management. We'll really talk about how the identity is a core piece of how we're securing our data and our users in this new world. It's about mobile device and application management. How are we making sure that our devices and our apps are secure? It's about information protection. How are we making sure that as data traverses from on-premise to the cloud to third-party, or from corporate-owned devices to user-owned devices, how are we making sure that we have information protection around our most valuable data? And then it's about threat detection and how we can monitor these environments to make sure that we are being proactive about potential threats and problems as opposed to reactive when a breach occurs. So we'll start with identity and access management. And really what we're talking about here, if you look below the pillars, you will see that all of these are aligned to specific products or platforms that are found in the Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite. We won't spend a lot of time in this webinar talking about licensing pieces of this. Other than that, these suites are available to you right now in market. But I will say that if you look at this and there are some pieces of this that you or your organization find more valuable than others, while I think what we're going to try and do here is help you understand why the bundle is so valuable and how this works together, there are individual products that sit under this that you are also able to procure for your organization. So when we talk about identity and access management, we're really talking about Azure Active Directory Premium. And what we're really seeing is that Microsoft treats, in this cloud-first, mobile-first world that I keep talking about, really treats identity as the control plane. When we're talking about a world that evolves outside of our domain and our firewall, the biggest thing that we need to know is, who are these users? Are we managing these users? Can we identify who is accessing our data? So identity really becomes the control plane that everything else is built around. And Azure Active Directory is Microsoft's solution to that. So if you think about your current stack, you probably have, most of the people on this phone probably have an on-premise Active Directory domain services server, maybe a couple of them depending on how large you are. What we are talking about doing with Azure Active Directory is extending the identities that we already know, that we manage, the user attributes that we already have, business BUs that we've already set up, OUs that we've already set up, and extending them into a cloud model. So Azure Active Directory allows those identities to be processed and interact not only with Microsoft's cloud services, things like Office 365. For anybody on the phone who's already using Office 365, you have Azure Active Directory right now. It is what underpins the identity store that Office 365 speaks to. So, but we're not only talking about extending that identity to Office 365, we're also talking about extending it to other cloud solutions, things like Dropbox, Box, Salesforce, Concur. We're talking about extending that to commercial and consumer identity providers. And we're talking about using that control plane as an identifier for the devices that you might bring to an organization. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we can manage those devices in a second. when we look at the circle of things that are provided by Azure Active Directory in the Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite, we really see when a user accesses or tries to access corporate data, a number of things happen. First off, Microsoft is processing about 10 terabytes of information a day on what looks like normal and normative access within not only your organization, but with organizations worldwide. And they're sharing that with every user that has Azure Active Directory Premium. So they're taking those learnings and they're saying, hey, does this usage pattern look accurate? Is this something you need to be concerned about? Does this look like a malicious point of access as opposed to a normal point of access? And it's giving you feedback to say, hey, this looks bad. This user accessed from New York and then they tried 2 minutes later to access from Moscow. Like, that is not normal. That is potentially malicious or a potential breach. So we're looking at all the access patterns, and then we're putting conditions and controls around that access. So based on what we know about the user, based on what we know about the potential threat level of the access, and then based on what we know about the application that the user is trying to access, we have a bunch of different controls that we can put in place. We can allow access. We can require MFA. We can say, hey, this usage pattern looks a little sketchy, so we're going to require a secondary point, a phone call, a text message, the Azure Authenticator app on iOS or Android. We're gonna give you an MFA challenge, and we're gonna make you prove you are who you say you are. We might, in some cases, force a password reset. We might say, hey, you know, this looks pretty dangerous. This looks like a breach. So we're not going to let you in until you reset your password and we make sure that not only are you who you say you are, but that we've resolved any potential issue for future intruders. And finally, we can deny or limit access. This is, you know, this doesn't look good, so we're not going to let you into this application. We're not going to let you into this data. And all of this works not only with those cloud services that we just talked about, Office 365, Dropbox, Salesforce, etc. But we can also make this work in your on-premise applications. So we can use Azure Active Directory really as a linchpin, as, again, that control point for protecting access across a wide range of devices and applications in your environment. So we know with Azure Active Directory Premium and Identity and Access Management, we know who the user is. And so now we move into, okay, well, how are we protecting the device that the user is accessing on? That's where we're really talking about mobile device and mobile application management with Microsoft Intune. So Intune is Microsoft's enterprise mobility and application management platform. If you guys have an MDM in your environment right now, which many of you may, you will be a little bit familiar with some of the things that Intune does, but it really expands beyond kind of the traditional boundaries when we think about an MDM of something like I need to protect my Android devices or I need to protect my iPads, and really becomes a holistic enterprise management solution with mobility at its core and bring your own device, things like that at its core. So Intune will protect Android, iOS, it will protect Windows Phone as well if you still have any legacy Windows Phone devices. It does mobile application management, so it's an MDM and an MAM, and we'll talk a little bit about, because Microsoft creates so many of the applications that your users use to be productive. So not only is it creating the MDM, but it is also the creator of Outlook and Word and Excel. There are some interesting things we can do within the app to protect data. But it also extends to PC management, and this is very important. As we look forward to the model of endpoint that Microsoft is working towards with all of the products that it creates and all of the announcements that it makes, what we really see is that the future is a Windows 10 powered device. We talked about Surface being kind of the premier example of that. A Windows 10 powered device that is protected by this enterprise mobility and security suite and managed by Intune. So not only does this does Intune help you protect mobile devices, phones, and iPads, etc. But it can also help you protect your client, your Windows 10 client endpoints to a very high degree, to the point where this really looks like, in practice, a lot like in CCM. If you guys are using SCCM right now, the future of device management, the future of the policies that you put in place with SCCM, we are seeing that move to Intune. We're seeing Windows 10 devices managed by Intune to be the next generation, quote unquote, of SCCM. Now, if you're using SCCM right now, Intune will integrate with SCCM. So you can give yourself kind of that single pane of glass to manage the pieces that are on SCCM and the pieces that will be on Intune. There's also a lot of features that have come out recently around co-management capability, devices that are managed with SCCM and Intune, to help your organization bridge that gap as you move from the more on-premise legacy-driven system center config man model into the more cloud-driven, Windows 10-driven Intune model. So what we look at when we talk about Intune from a device perspective, and this is whether it's a mobile device or whether it's a Windows 10 device, we're talking about lifecycle management with our MDM and MAM, right? We're talking about provisioning a device, and we'll talk about specifically how that works with Windows 10 in just a second here. But making sure that we're provisioning the right applications, that we're deploying the right restrictions or data protection policies, that the device has security policies, certificates, etc. Then we're talking about managing and protecting your device. So as this device is used, how are we constantly making sure that it's not jailbroken? How are we making sure that things like cut, copy, paste, screenshot are enabled or disabled on an application by application basis or on a device by device basis across our organization? And then how are we getting visibility? How are we seeing an inventory of the devices that are enrolled and have access? Then obviously, as a user takes their device, we retire it, right? So we have options for full wipe capability, so reset to factory defaults. We also have the option for selective wipe, so we can selectively wipe devices and we can wipe corporate data without necessarily touching pet pics, baby pics, wedding pictures, etc. And because Microsoft is the purveyor not only of the MDM and MAM, but also of many of the applications, there's some really interesting things we can do when we're talking about retiring a device. So for instance, if your employee uses Outlook and they have a personal, the Outlook mobile app, and they have a personal email attached to it as well as a corporate email, those apps are enlightened, so we can delete corporate data without touching personal data. OneDrive does something similar. Employees has a OneDrive for business, and they also have a personal OneDrive. We can selectively wipe the corporate data off OneDrive without touching the personal data, and that's something that that Microsoft is uniquely empowered to do, again, because they create the application as well, that you don't see when you have other MDM providers that are taking this on. One of the big things that Mike talked about, and one of the unique capabilities of management with Intune, when we're talking about the Windows 10 devices, and this was designed for Surface. So this is a very Surface-led motion, although as Mike spoke about, there are other OEMs, Lenovo, HP, I know of, all of them will get there eventually, that are starting to look at how are we going to provision these devices? In a world where we're trying to move so much of our management to the cloud, in a world where our employees are working differently, devices are being procured differently, we're not only using our devices, but we're also using, consumer-owned devices. How are we provisioning these endpoints? Right now, we have depots where things get shipped. We might have our own deployment facilities. PCM offers deployment facilities for a lot of our customers, so we'll put your golden image on. But obviously there are steps to that process, and every single one of those steps elongates the amount of time we can get a device to our end users and increases the cost. So with what Microsoft calls Windows Autopilot, we are really bringing deployment and provisioning into the same cloud model that we're bringing the Office applications and our management and our identity. And what Autopilot does is it allows you to purchase a Windows 10 device, get that Windows 10 device registered to your organization and shipped to an end user. And when that end user opens the device up, this is an out-of-the-box experience. When that end user opens up that device and puts in their credentials, you automatically start the process of deploying your applications, your security requirements, your policies. And all of this happens without your IT team ever having to touch the device. You set up what the device needs, but the actual provisioning of the device happens in the out-of-the-box experience from the end user. So imagine a scenario where you could purchase Surface laptops from PCM, and PCM would tell you there's an indicator on every device. That's how this works. They'd tell you the device indicator, and you would register those devices with your company, ship them directly to the end user. They never need to go through a depot. They never need to go through a deployment or provisioning warehouse. Ship them directly to the end user, and on startup, when that employee removes it from the box and puts in the credentials you require, that machine is starting to deploy your corporate image, your corporate applications, your corporate security policies, and within a matter of minutes, that machine is now registered, ready to go with your organization and all of the policies that you've put in place, and IT never had to touch it. That's a phenomenal experience, not only for the end user who now can, get a device faster, but for IT departments that spend lots of their time provisioning, deploying endpoints. And all of this is enabled by Windows 10 and Intune. So Intune is a critical piece of the autopilot process, because during an autopilot deployment or an autopilot provisioning, you do need to register the device with Intune or another MDM. It needs to have some type of management behind this to work. But autopilot's really where we see, again, when I talked kind of about the future state that Microsoft was working towards, what we see is Windows 10 devices deployed by Autopilot, managed by Intune, and wrapped around with the rest of the enterprise mobility and security suite that we're talking about here. So going back to that first conversation I had about these particular point solutions and products and platforms that Microsoft makes available, it is true that they are available to you on a one-off basis. But really, when we look at the story that is being told, the security that is enabled, and the integration points across all of these products, it's a very, very powerful bundle of products to approach that cloud-first, mobile-first world. So we know who the user is with identity and access management. We know what device they're accessing from, and in many cases, we have deployed the device with Autopilot using Microsoft Intune. And now we're talking about information protection and how we can create data or protect existing data with policies that make sure that even as our data traverses across these different control planes, our own on-premise environment, our own cloud environment, third-party SaaS services in Office 365, that we make sure that these critical pieces of data are protected with policy. That's really where we're talking about Azure Information Protection. Azure Information Protection allows you to create a classification language or vernacular for your organization and to classify documents based on certain policies so that only certain users have access to them. So think about putting a specific plan around that only executives could see, a legal document that would only be able to be accessed by legal, an HR document that would only be able to be accessed by HR, a sales promotion that could go out in the world but would expire after 60 days and then not be able to be accessed again, or a kind of self-detonating quote if you wanted to expire a quote. All of these things are enabled by Azure Information Protection. So what kind of capabilities do we have when we undertake a classification protection language kind of vernacular experience in our organizations? Well, we can get automatic classification. So we can look through our Exchange environments, our SharePoint environments, servers that are running SCI, and say, hey, does it look like these documents have credit card information? Does it look like they have protected health information? If so, we need to classify them automatically. Similarly, we can recommend classification. So as employees create documents, you can say, hey, it looks like this document runs afoul of X, Y, and Z policy. Would you like to classify it? We recommend that you classify it internal only or HR only. Manual reclassification. So if you think, hey, this isn't strict enough, or it's not strict, or it's too strict, you do have the ability to reclassify. And then user-specific classification. So if you want to empower your users, you don't have to give them this capability. But if you want to empower your users to create their own documents with their own specific classification and protection policy, you can do that as well. And again, because this classification and this label travels with the piece of data, you can have peace of mind that, hey, even if this thing gets outside of my organization, even if it ends up in somebody's personal Dropbox, even if it gets shared in Box or someplace that it shouldn't, I know that I'm okay because I can track this piece of information and I know that nobody can access it without the proper credentials. So the last thing we'll talk about here before I open it up into questions is threat detection. So we talked about who the user is with identity and access management, what device they're on with Intune, how that information, the pieces of data specifically, are protected as they travel across identities and devices with Azure Information Protection. And with threat detection, Microsoft Cloud App Security and Microsoft Advanced Threat Analytics, we're talking about how can we proactively monitor these environments, these cloud-first, mobile-first environments, to make sure that anything that is a potential breach, anything that is potentially malicious, we have visibility into so that we can respond accordingly. So what is Advanced Threat Analytics? Advanced Threat Analytics allows, and it's now called Azure Advanced Threat Protection, so that's why you see kind of the difference in vernacular there. But really what it does is it sits on top of your on-premise domain controllers and your Azure Active Directory, and it starts doing, when we talked about that 10 terabytes of data that Microsoft was collecting in the beginning for Azure Active Directory, it starts doing similar behavioral analytics and machine learning specifically for your environment. So it starts looking at what is normative usage, what does Karen's usage look like, what does Karen's peer group usage looks like. So it's collecting all of this data across all sorts of authentication, and then it's analyzing and learning it. So again, it is trying to decipher what looks right and what looks wrong for your organization specifically. Now, it augments those capabilities with all of the intelligence that Microsoft gets on a daily basis. But really, it's talking about learning your specific environment and what looks normal to you. There are lots of products out there, right, that claim to do something similar, but I think if anybody on the line has ever had one of them, one of the problems with those experiences has always been, I get a lot of data, but it's very hard for me to tell which of that data is actually actionable and which is just noise. And most IT departments don't have a body to sit in front of their intrusion detection system all day. And so you end up with, yeah, I know that it's telling me things that I should be looking at, but I have problems separating the wheat from the chaff, right? So by using machine learning and behavioral analytics powered by Azure, we're able to give you a far, far better look at what is actually actionable, what is required, what really needs to be investigated, and what does not necessarily need to be investigated based on profiles from your environment. So what does it look for? It looks for abnormal behavior and suspicious activities. It looks for breach-oriented search results. Again, it's utilizing Microsoft's intelligence database to get some of this, looking for past the ticket, past the hash, all those kinds of lateral movement, all kind of the breach type malicious activities that we would expect to want to look for in an environment. So that's what it's detecting. And then finally, okay, well, how are we being proactive about this? How are we responding to these? And it gives you the ability, it gives you a lot of alerting capabilities and investigative capabilities to say, okay, this is something that happened. In real time, I am getting an alert that there is a potential malicious attack. Here are the recommendations for potential breach or malicious activity remediation, all from within the Advanced Threat Analytics, the ATP portal. So it's really a unified pane of glass, a single pane of glass, if you will, that helps you monitor your environment and be not only proactive, but get reactive threats in real time so that you can respond. And finally here, we'll talk about Microsoft Cloud App Security. So talked about all that other stuff. Advanced threat analytics and advanced threat protection help you understand your authentication environment. Cloud App Security helps you understand what is going on inside cloud environments that you do not necessarily own. So this is where we're really talking about, okay, I know that I have a pretty good handle on what goes on inside my stack and what goes on inside my organization. But I am also using Salesforce. I am also using Dropbox. I need to have some visibility into what is being shared and accessed in those environments, even though I don't own them, because it's vitally important for me that my data is protected not only on my on-premise applications, but also on my cloud applications. So Cloud App Security walks through a framework for monitoring these threats, which starts with discovery. So we're using cloud discovery to make sure that, hey, what in my organization do I have visibility into and I can manage? And what is, quote unquote, everybody's heard the phrase on the phone, shadow IT. So I pay for OneDrive, but how many users out there are using Dropbox? Having insight into what cloud services, generally speaking, and I don't have the number off the top of my head, but there's something like 60 or 70% of the cloud services used in any organization are, for all intents and purposes, shadow IT. They are applications that have been picked up by a specific business unit or a specific group or a specific individual that were not authorized or sanctioned by IT. We don't know that they're there. We don't know how to control them. So the first step to getting a handle on your cloud environment is finding out what those are. Second, information protection. We already talked about that a little with Azure Information Protection. How are we securing data so that as it traverses cloud environments, we know that it has protection? Then, threat detection. So as that data gets shared to Salesforce, to Dropbox, or Box, or Office 365 even, as that piece of data or those documents that are highly classified are shared around, who's alerting me of that? How do I get alerts that this is actually happening and I need to do something about it? Cloud App Security will let you know, hey, Sherry shared, that was a little bit of a tongue twister, this document through Salesforce. John shared this document through Dropbox, and that is outside of corporate policy, and you need to talk to them. And finally, on top of that, not only controlling the documents that are getting sent around, but actually going out of your way to protect that from happening. So having in-session control and policies that are put in place that can limit user access and user capabilities within a session in third-party cloud environments that you don't own. That's the trick here, right? You don't own these environments, you don't control them, but using Cloud App Security, we can have visibility and protection inside them. And so I won't go necessarily through this whole thing because I think it reiterates a lot of what I've already said here. But when we talk about the holistic story, when we talk about what Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite is doing and how it's doing it, we're talking about users that we are identifying through Azure Active Directory, that we are putting controls and conditions around on Azure Active Directory, accessing through devices that are managed by Intune so that we have controls and policy around the devices, creating data that is protected by Azure Information Protection so that we can have security that as that data goes across organizations and services and clouds, it's protected, that are monitored by advanced threat analytics to look for potential malicious activity and data and access breaches, and then finally that are protected by Cloud App Security so that even when these documents leave our boundaries that we have control over, we have visibility and protection to make sure that our users and our data are secure. You can really see how this creates a very compelling cloud-first, mobile-first story around how we're protecting our documents, our data, our users in a world that is no longer looks like a desktop in a cubicle somewhere or even a laptop in a cubicle somewhere, a world that is aligned to how our users want to work and how our devices are built to work, built to be mobile, built to be accessible, but still using the Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite built to be secure. And finally, before I open it up to questions, I just want to tell you guys, PCM is here to help you understand these challenges and help you navigate the suites of products that Microsoft makes available. So if what you heard on this call today around Surface, around Enterprise Mobility Suite was interesting, I encourage you, we are making these modern workplace envisioning sessions available to you. They are completely no cost to you, but what will happen is you will get somebody like me, although not necessarily me, on the phone to really dive into your unique business challenges. What's happening in your workplace? What are the collaboration, the security challenges that you're facing right now? And how can we alleviate those challenges using Microsoft Cloud solutions? How can we take you from a traditional workplace environment to a modern workplace environment powered by Microsoft Cloud solutions? You guys are available to register for this today at pcm.com/envision for the modern workplace envisioning session. And like I said, if you found any of this helpful or interesting, if you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to check out that site. Other than that, George, I'll hand it back to you for some Q&A.
All right, thank you very much. We do have some time remaining for questions. Again, if you have questions that you have not yet shared, please go ahead and enter them in the question box now. Gentlemen, we don't have anything coming in just yet, so I don't know if you wanted to summarize or anything.
I think I summarized pretty well, unless, Mike, you've got something.
No, I mean, I think, we covered it, in full detail, right? It's this digital transformation, right? That's, the device is driving it, and it's backed by Microsoft 365, right? Making sure users have devices that they love to use, and making sure that IT has a tool to manage those devices. That's really the story here. But like John said, the envisioning sessions are there. Please reach out to your account executive if you want more information on that, or just register for the session. We're here to support you. So if there aren't any questions, we'll just take that as we covered everything, in depth, and we'll let everybody go.
All right. So with that, many thanks to our speakers, Mike Nichols and John Pontius, and thank you all for joining us today. Be sure to check out www.pcm.com/webinars for our on-demand recordings and for our upcoming webinar schedule. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you again for future webinars. Have a great day.